What type of person you think would do this?
No, I haven't given that much thought. But, I mean, cold.
Well, we were quite scared, to tell you the truth, and this is really, you know, for something like this to happen in a small town like this, you just can't believe it.
3 people are dead from multiple stab wounds, and state police are calling their deaths a homicide.
At this point in time, we haven't determined who it is, so we don't know where they may be headed to.
Jesse just said he was scared. The families don't need to know that.
No, we do. You feel you did the right thing by killing Jeff?
I feel like the world's a better place without Jeff Ryan. Good things could grow where evil was destroyed.
All right, that's it. Do you understand you're not under arrest?
Yes, I
Okay,
understand.
okay.
I mean, I'd be a little bit shocked if I were under arrest, to tell you the truth.
So would I, but...
And I'm here to cooperate.
We're talking about what type of person would do this. Is it cold, greedy, heartless?
Someone just with no love for life. No love for things that grow. And I mean, what we know about Tolkien and Tolkien's writing, it's, you know, his main themes are hope and hopelessness and a love for things that grow. He was very much against the Industrial Revolution and stuff like that. Anything that took away from nature, took away from life.
You said your Hobbit is your favorite show?
Book.
Book.
Bilbo Baggins.
I'm sorry?
Bilbo Baggins, yeah.
By bringing Tolkien into the conversation, he's deflecting in a lot of ways. He's sort of leading them down a path that has nothing to do with why he would be there. I think at the core of the psychopathic personality is the desire to control. You learn to manipulate very well and to not feel guilty, certainly, about manipulating.
You can often get more information from a psychopath if you're willing to be flexible in your interview. In some ways, let them take control and lead the interview, and then weave in and out and try to get more information that way.
Can you think of any good reason for something like this to happen?
Any good reason for something like this to happen? No. I cannot think of any good reason something like that could happen.
The idea that he would shake his head yes when he's saying no is another tell.
No.
A lot of times during interrogations, people's body language runs contrary to what they're actually saying.
What often, in my experience, makes psychopaths better at lying is the glib and superficial charm that they're able to use as part of that. They come across very likable.
Let's talk about how you met Jeff.
He came over to Barbara Joyce. He came over a couple days after I got there. They introduced me. They said, "Oh yeah, this is Hank." I was like, "Oh, nice to meet you." I shook his hand because I had never met him.
And you guys hit it off? I hit it off?
Yeah, we get along.
Okay.
I asked him if he could find me any work, and I went back up to check and see if you had any work, if you
That
heard
day.
anything.
What it was.
He didn't know of anything. He's mowing the lawn. He stopped mowing the lawn, talked to me, invited me in. Said, have a beer. I come in and I have a beer with him. And he shows me around the house. And that's the only visit, though, that I've made to Jeff.
You said you went there after that very first time you met him.
But really, that was the week later, just to be simple.
Uh-oh. At this point, his story has changed, and it's not uncommon that individuals who are psychopathic are overly confident in their ability to just shift and fool the other person that they're talking to. So he's not very apologetic about changing his story.
Why would you do that? Why would you confuse me like that? I confuse easy.
Because it's irrelevant. Because it's...
Well, it's not really irrelevant because we got 3 people dead. So that's why it makes it very relevant.
I understand.
Especially when people are not telling the truth.
I understand, but I mean, I had nothing to do with it. Here we have kitchen bar. There's your refrigerator where I got the beer. Here's the door to the house. Here's the porch. There's a bathroom. And there's a bedroom.
He's drawing, he's holding the pen. He has let the investigator's letting the defendant be in control, or the suspect here be in control. And he's, in this interrogation, actually, I felt like they did do a really good job overall, sort of taking a one-down position. We know less than you. You educate us about this situation. And I think if you can see here, Mr. Ormsby he's in an educational stance. He's at the whiteboard, he's got the marker. It's almost as if he's trying to teach the investigator about what went on. And again, from an interviewing perspective, that's a really great way to try to elicit rapport so that the psychopath will even want to talk to you and disclose this information.
Okay, now you're inside the house here, and it was just you and Jeff in the house? Did you say you never met Jason?
I've never met Jason.
Okay, have you ever heard of Jason? Did you go down in here?
No.
How do you know it was a bathroom there? You asked.
Because I asked.
Did you go to the bathroom?
No,
Why not?
I didn't have to go to the bathroom.
Why did you ask where the bathroom was?
In case I needed to go to the bathroom.
Are you kidding me?
Most animals, when they're cornered, attack, counterattack. And depending on how prone to violence they are, they might become violent. They can also resort to what has been referred to as kind of that psychopathic double talk. They're really sort of just wrapping words around sort of an empty vessel, twisting it into a pretzel, and they leave you trying to figure out what it is they're saying.
So this event here, where you were inside, was about a week before this murder happened?
Maybe 2.
Maybe 2 weeks. Never met Jason?
Never met Jason.
Well, now we have a problem.
Why?
All right. Inside that trailer, there's a ball sitting there, 3 balls. And in that trailer also, we have your DNA and fingerprints on one of the balls.
I think he probably is aware it's going to be very tricky to get out of DNA. And it's possible he's also thinking, yeah, it's okay. They think they got me there, but I'll still find another way to get around this.
See this picture?
Yes.
3 balls, right? This one's yours. One of these is Jason, and one of these is Jeff. But you see my problem. This ball here belongs to Jason, who you never met.
Whom I've never met.
No way in hell that ball sat there for 2 weeks. If anything, it sat there for a couple hours. So we have a problem with that. I need you to explain to me why it is that beer ball is there at the time of the murder.
I think psychopaths tend to be good liars. They certainly don't feel a sense of guilt. And depending on how bright they are, that's when they can mess up.
You were in that house a couple hours before the murder. Just tell me how this all happened.
I don't know.
Jane, I want the truth.
Beyond lies at this point, so I'll be willing to tell you everything you want to know. I'm sorry, London. Perhaps I do need a lawyer. This is the first time I've cried.
Yeah. I know. It's a lot to absorb, buddy. It's a lot to process.
I am struck by what appears to be shallow affect, and that's one of the traits of psychopathy. And that's sort of, oh, I know something bad's happening or sad, so I should cry, so I'm going to cry. There's not a lot of depth to his, apparent sadness here.
Well, obviously, I wasn't planning on getting caught.
Walk me through it.
I'm already guilty. I might as well.
Right.
I think we should start with why.
Okay.
Because of the things he's done to other people.
Uh-huh.
Because of what he is. Was.
So you hated Jeff because he was a drug dealer?
Yeah, I smoke weed, but I don't believe in drugs like that.
Right. So you decided to take care of that? Be a vigilante type thing?
My plan was to kill Jeff Ryan and leave no witnesses in my house. They were bad people and they hurt people. And I thought it was some means of justification. I thought something good could grow from taking away them.
Mm-hmm.
It's an exalted state for some. They're like God for that moment. Because really, if we're talking about a murderer or someone who does serial killings, they have the capacity to determine who's going to live and die. So there's something godlike about that. You'll see this grandiosity, pompousness, and smugness about what it is they've done.
Unfortunately, Jason was there.
Fortunately, Jason and Jesse were there. Jesse was in the living room. And he was playing video games.
I have to ask you, because curiosity's killing me. When you got there and you knew that there were 2 other people there, what made you continue?
Courage. I mean, I went and I said said to myself I was going to do it. I had it in my mind that I was going to do it.
Another person might have said, I know where he lives, I've been invited in, I'm gonna hang out, I'll come back another day and revisit this, but he felt compelled to stay and kill 3 people. It is cold and calculated, and there's not even pseudo-emotion. There's no attempt at revulsion at what he did.
What made you continue?
I had it in my mind that I was going to break the molds of society and commit such a thing, and I had picked my targets because they were bad people.
I think it just speaks to his callous lack of regard for humanity. He made up his mind. He had a goal. He was going to take Jeff out, and the rest is just collateral damage. It's too bad they had to be there, is the attitude he seems to portray.
For the psychopath, They typically know basically why they're doing what they're doing, but his explanation is intellectual, and to me, it doesn't hold water, really. It doesn't tie in at all to the amount of rage this guy really has.
Everything was going fine, and I've been talking about spending the winter in the forest, just camping out, building a hut.
Sure.
And he said, oh, I got nails.
He was out there to show you some nails or something. And he bent over to get you the nails. What happened?
You're right. I killed him.
You killed Jeff. And how did you do that?
With a knife.
I knew that I couldn't just leave him there with two people who just saw me.
It is cold and calculated, and there's not even pseudo-emotion. Naturally, he's got to go back in and kill a little boy and the other guy he doesn't even know, so no one can identify him. And that's, you know, that's a real big leap. And often the first kills are big leaps. This is where he seems most psychopathic to me.
I go back in, stab Jason. Jesse ran to the back room. So I chased Jesse, and he was the quickest. He just said he was scared. The families don't need to know that.
No, we do. How many times do you think you stabbed him?
Well, I heard on the news 5, so I'm assuming it's 5.
So then you come out to check on Jason, and he's gone.
And yeah, he's gone. He disappeared.
think-
He was out of my
Oh,
sight. He ran down the road, and I chased him down the road, and that's why he was in the ditch. He didn't understand, because obviously I had just met him, and there was no reason to him.
You really only met us the very first time.
It was really the first time I met him.
Yeah.
I think there are moments of candor here. It is possible that they can have moments where they are even appalled by their own behavior. Now, how long or how deep or how that moment of recognition really stands with them, that's the question.
Did you do something else besides stab him?
I cut his throat.
You cut his throat? How many times did you cut his throat?
2, maybe 3 slashes. Obviously, this is premeditated murder, is the term you used for it.
Psychopaths tend to use jargon in whatever situation they're in to exemplify their vast knowledge and intelligence. And I find it's the grandiosity within them that sneaks out and wants to use that language and vernacular in whatever context.
Did you go there planning to kill him?
Yes.
You did?
Okay.
All right. How long before this were you planning this?
Maybe days.
Have you ever killed before?
No.
Do you feel you did the right thing by killing Jeff?
I feel like the world's a better place without Jeff Ryan. You know, best possible outcome. Okay. Honestly. Yep. That good things could grow
evil was destroyed. You might not see it like that, but it's quite possible that these families will now become closer or stronger where they were. That maybe those children might be better growing up without their father.
Psychopaths are most often not remorseful. I think it makes it a little bit difficult for the majority of us to wrap our mind around how he could engage in those actions and basically show no remorse.
You're going to be charged with 3 counts of murder from the state of Maine. All right.
Could I maybe finish my copy?
I had to learn over the years how wrong it was, what I did, and how much pain I caused you. I'm sorry. It hurts me how senseless it was because he was always such a good friend to me.
You have any tears coming down your face?
Yes, I had tears coming down my face.
Because I haven't seen you wipe your nose or wipe an eye.
An unthinkable tragedy unfolding right now at Southwood Middle School in Miami-Dade.
Is there any particular reason why you did this?
No, there's not.
Do you know what you did is wrong?
Yes, I do.
Are you sorry that this happened today?
No, I'm not.
I feel horrible about what I did. I had to learn over years how wrong it was.
Mike, what's your birthday?
February 2nd, 1990.
Happy birthday. So you just turned 14?
Yes, I did.
Very good. What were your intentions yesterday?
My intentions yesterday were to kill Andre. I was gonna stab him in the back and stab here, and that would have been it. Me, Andre, Jamie, and myself were in the bathroom.
How old is Andre?
He is 13.
What grade is Andre in?
He is in 8th grade.
Is he a friend of yours?
Yes, he is.
His tone is, detached, factual. When we speak with emotion in our voice, what we're actually doing is expressing how we feel, which is why the voice is so reflective and expressive and modulates. If we don't experience a richness of emotions, then our voice is going to be somewhat flat or somewhat controlled.
I was going to strangle him first, and then after he was dead, I was going to make sure by stabbing him.
Okay, and this was Andre?
This was Andre.
One of the characteristics of psychopathy is that they're manipulative. They have a goal, they have an agenda. They don't share it with you necessarily, but they're constantly monitoring the environment around them to see how, when, and if it provides them an opportunity to go ahead and do what they want to do.
His journal is really interesting. You see him exploring identities of serial killers and mass murderers. He starts to make plans, and then there's clear fantasies where he's drawing how he'd like to kill his victims.
At the bottom, he's written, "Will become a serial killer."
Now, did you lure him into the bathroom yesterday?
Into the bathroom, yes, not the stall. I told them both that we were going to be late to class. And so we snuck upstairs after the late bell had rung. We got to the bathroom, and I was trying to convince Andre to go into the stall.
Okay. And how are you going to do that?
I told him that I had something to show him. His response, he didn't want to do it, so he said no. He's like, why can't Jamie go first? My response then was that he's gonna go next.
Okay. Now, did Jamie agree? Did Jamie say, I'll come in, I'll look?
Yes, he did.
Okay. And what did you say at that point?
I said no, he's gonna go first.
Okay. And any particular reason why?
I wanted to get Andre killed first. I said, are you gonna guys cooperate tomorrow? They're like, yeah, okay, we'll cooperate tomorrow.
All right. And you went off to class?
Yes.
If you're egocentric, then you can manipulate the reality as you want, feed it in the way that you want. He had a plan, and the plan had an order to it. And Andre didn't buy it. Andre didn't trust him. And when the plan didn't go as it worked, he couldn't adjust immediately. The anticipation of the killing probably gave him intense pleasure. He wants to get it right, and getting it right is exciting. The actual planning is very exciting.
What were your intentions today?
I would have talked him into coming to the bathroom with me, coming into the stall. Then I would have proceeded to slit his throat and stab him continuously until he died in the neck area.
Yes.
And then I would have left him there.
Yes.
And gone back downstairs and talked Jamie into coming upstairs, lured him into the other bathroom, and slit his throat and stabbed him in the neck.
Today, who did you meet at the fence?
I met Jamie Coffey.
Why did you try to why did you make the suggestion to Jamie to go inside the school today?
I was planning to murder him.
How long have you had this plan?
A little under a week.
Michael Hernandez is one of those individuals that I think it's easy to find really distressing and disturbing, because we'd all like to imagine that children are good people and that it's only as they grow up that maybe they adopt antisocial behavior and do harmful and dangerous things. And so in spite of all the evidence that children can be violent, mean to one another, and do horrible things to one another, we really prefer to see children as rather innocent. His case, I think, really highlights the way in which young people, pre-pubertal or going through puberty, can be highly dangerous, highly organized, and be quite psychopathic at that age. And I think what people would prefer not to believe that.
I was going to get him into the stall, the last stall, because it's the biggest, so I'd have more room. I got him into the stall by saying, look, I have something to show you. So I got him into the stall, and I told him to turn around because I wanted it to be a surprise. Before that, I put on the gloves. He saw me put on the gloves, and I said all that.
Oh, you're going too fast.
He might be getting more excited at remembering what he did and reliving the incident. Not all psychopaths want to tell their story. Those are the ones we don't catch. And then there's the sort that have more narcissistic traits, who want witnesses, who want admiration, who want people to see how smart, how violent, how callous, how special they are.
Now, what transpired next?
Okay, I was talking to him and I told him, all right, now I have to put my hand over your mouth.
Okay. Once you did that, what happened next?
I took the knife out and I proceeded to slit his throat.
Did Jamie say or do anything? Did he put up a struggle?
Yes, he did. He turned around after I did that. He asked me not to kill him. So I told him, okay, I'm not going to cooperate.
Okay.
Which was a lie.
Right.
And so I realized that the stall door was open, so I locked it.
We see that lying comes very easy to psychopaths. People who have psychopathy, they do not feel a sense of guilt or shame. That lying is simply in the service of still getting you to do what they want. That's a very slick, automatic response, and he has no intention of not killing him. He has no intention of letting him live, but he figures that'll probably keep him from panicking.
And then I turned him around again and proceeded to stab him.
And where did you stab him, Mike?
I'm not positively sure, but I'm guessing around the jugular vein, right around here.
Okay.
That's what I was aiming for.
Now, after you did that, what happened?
I left, I took my gloves off, and I flushed them down the toilet.
All right. Now, you said you had gone out and you washed your hands.
Yes. I put the knife was broken because of the stab wounds, and I couldn't close it back, so I closed it as much as I could, and I put it in my jacket pocket.
Okay.
I proceeded to go to the sink, and I wiped some of the blood off the jacket, took the jacket off. No, I didn't.
He's becoming more animated as he speeds up, and he's talking about it.
He might be getting more excited at remembering what he did and reliving the incident, because that moment is just intoxicating, it's exhilarating. And Hernandez didn't expect to feel that excited or that alive.
And is there any specific reason why you planned this?
No, there's not.
Why did you choose Jamie, your friend?
He was the easiest out of anybody because he would have followed me because we're such good friends. And I knew he would have followed me in there and done what I would have said.
He has no empathy, therefore he has no loyalty, and he has no attachment. So he was simply someone that he felt he could successfully dominate and kill.
Let me ask you this. Is there any particular reason why you did this to Jamie?
No, there's not.
Did he offend you in any way?
No, he did not.
Do you think what you did is right or wrong?
No, I don't.
Well, what don't you think?
I think it is neither right, but I don't think it was wrong.
Do you know what you did is wrong?
Yes, I do.
Are you sorry that this happened today?
No, I'm not.
He believes what he's doing is right, but he knows it's legally wrong. We're all adhering to rules of morality and a moral value to something, and he's saying, yeah, that's not my rule.
In the courtroom today, Michael Hernandez, now 17, the accused killer.
You took his life. Why, Michael? Why? He was your friend, Michael. He was your friend.
The state told jurors the murder was carried out by a 14-year-old who knew right from wrong because he tried hiding the crime.
The defendant is guilty of first-degree murder as charged.
With that verdict, Michael Hernandez sat silent, emotionless, staring straight at a jury that just sent him to prison for life.
to learn over years how wrong it was.
What was stupid was you didn't think that I was smart enough to listen to your calls.
You know, what more do you want from me?
For sure. Oh, why don't you practice your weekend learning how to cry?
Oh my God. God, man, I may have to stab myself.
Oh my God.
And it hurts me how sensitive it was because he was always such a good friend to me.
Do you have any tears coming down your
Yes, I
face?
had tears coming down my face.
Because I haven't seen you wipe your nose or wipe an eye.
I think he's feeling annoyed. She's poking at him. She's saying, you're lying. And I think he probably thinks he did a pretty good job of trying to sound sorry. I mean, that is one difficulty that psychopaths really can't appreciate. Since they have no empathy, they often can't appreciate how they're perceived because they're shallow affect. And that's what you'd call his attempt at crying. It's got the form of it, but there's no feeling. I don't think he believes it's wrong, but he's learned how to say it over the years that what he did was wrong.
The facade that you see is not the facade that he is.
So, I think I told you last time that because, you know, I'm supposed to be going up for my resentencing in August. It just seems like such a needless formality that put me through another psychological interview. I've been interviewed by so many psychologists, psychiatrists over the years. It's ridiculous. And you know, what more do you want from me? My judge, who happens to be a former prosecutor, is totally on the state side, which is really bad. He's a piece of
Oh, why don't you practice your weekend learning how to cry?
oh my God. God, man, I may have to stab myself.
Oh my God.
I try to bring a sharp object to the interview. Do you have something in your hand, Mr. Hernandez? No. Stab. Oh, see, I can cry.
I'm human, I swear. Look at these tears.
When I have life-threatening wounds, I can cry.
Oh, Lordy.
Got a paper clip in there?
No, ma'am.
Got a knife?
No, ma'am.
How'd you muster up those tears?
I feel horrible about what I did.
The remorse you show because you think, quote, the judge is a piece of right?
No, ma'am, I don't think that.
You said that, though, right?
I did say it, and it was a horrible, stupid thing to say.
What was stupid was you didn't think that I was smart enough to listen to your calls.
He doesn't even apologize to the judge, which, you know, if I said something really stupid and now I know this person has decision-making capacity, it might say, I really apologize for that. It was disrespectful. People who have psychopathy don't feel that. They do not feel a sense of guilt or shame.
But then I was reading that Ed Gein actually inspired the main character for the movie Psycho, and he inspired the Buffalo Bill character out of Silence of the Lambs. That was a crazy. It was funny because he used to dig up bodies and he was making a skin suit. That was a crazy.
So I think that exchange is really telling that he doesn't get it, and she's joking about it, but he's being serious. It's not the behavior we'd expect to see with someone if they had genuinely changed.
One thing I love about your letters, you can tell when you get really excited about something because your handwriting goes down the drain. The other one that I found in there that I was curious about, it says take right eye. Is that literal or figurative?
Oh, no. That was when I was actually going to start being a serial killer. That was going to be my signature.
Oh, okay.
It was I was going to take their right eye and carve a cross into their forehead.
Oh, nice.
You want to get credit for your stuff.
He's hoping someone will make a movie about him.
The worst thing that would happen is, like, imagine you're a serial killer and you're killing all these people, and someone else gets all the credit. How crappy would that be?
In my profession, we say we're not really sure what remorse is or how you measure it. We all think we know what we're talking about. We say, well, you're sorry for what you did and you won't do it again. But what we realize is that in the courtroom, a jury or a judge is looking for signs of that. In these courtroom situations, they're looking for a sign that would reassure them this individual will be safe to let out. For the psychopaths, most of them can't generate enough feeling to be persuasive. There's a few that can, but it's pretty rare, especially if the crime's been pretty horrific and graphic. And in this case, in the courtroom, when you see him apparently crying, you're not really sure what to make of it. There's no tears, but he's sort of making sobbing sounds. And it doesn't really come across as genuine, even saying, I'm so sorry.
The call came in just before midnight, a thin, trembling voice cutting through the static of a Brooklyn dispatch line, whispering that something was wrong in apartment 3 beyond Baltic Street, that the lights had been on for 2 days straight, and no one had seen Margaret Hale leave for work. And when officers forced the door open, they found the television still flickering in a darkened living room, a half-finished glass of wine on the coffee table, and the silence, thick, unnatural, pressing against the walls like it had weight. Margaret lay in the hallway between the bedroom and the bathroom, shoes still on, coat half-buttoned, as if she had just stepped inside and never made it any farther, her body positioned with a precision that felt deliberate, almost staged, and the only obvious wound was a thin, angry line across her throat, clean and controlled, not the frenzied chaos detectives were used to seeing in crimes of passion. There was no sign of forced entry, no overturned furniture, no shattered glass. The lock was intact. The chain hung loose. Whoever had been there had either been invited in or had a key. In 1979, New York was no stranger to violence. The city pulsed with it, headlines screaming of shootings in Harlem, muggings in the Bronx, arson in abandoned tenements, and yet this was different. Margaret Hale was 32, a paralegal with a midtown firm, known for her punctuality, her quiet routines, her Sunday calls to her mother upstate. She had no criminal record, no known enemies, no history of volatile relationships. Neighbors described her as polite, reserved, the kind of woman who kept her curtains drawn but always nodded hello in the stairwell. The super said she paid rent early. Her coworkers said she stayed late, meticulous with case files. Nothing about her life hinted at the violence that now stained the hallway carpet beneath her. Detectives canvassed the building through the early morning hours, knocking on doors, flashing badges, jotting down fragmented observations. A loud thud heard around 8:30 p.m., footsteps on the stairs, a man in a dark coat seen smoking near the entrance, but no one could describe his face. No one could agree on his height, no one could even swear he had anything to do with 3B. In a city of millions, anonymity was easy. Faces blurred together, strangers passed without memory. The medical examiner placed time of death between 7:45 and 9:15 p.m., a narrow window that should have helped, but instead only emphasized how ordinary the evening had been. No screams reported. No calls for help. Just a woman returning home, and then nothing. Inside the apartment, detectives cataloged everything. The wine bottle, Merlot, recently opened. One glass used, no visible lipstick on the rim. A second glass sat clean and dry in the dish rack. The kitchen sink was empty. In the bedroom, drawers had not been rifled through. Jewelry remained untouched in a small wooden box. Her purse lay on the bed, wallet intact, cash undisturbed. It was not robbery. It was not random. It was targeted, precise, and chillingly calm. A single latent fingerprint was lifted from the doorknob inside the apartment, partial and smudged, insufficient for comparison in an era long before digital databases and instant matches. In 1979, evidence was physical, fragile, dependent on paper files and human memory. The first theory was someone she knew. A boyfriend, perhaps, though friends insisted Margaret had recently ended a brief relationship with a man named Daniel Reeves, an accountant she had met at a holiday party months earlier. Reeves was brought in for questioning within 48 hours, his alibi neat and rehearsed, dinner with colleagues, a receipt timestamped at 8:12 p.m., 3 witnesses confirming his presence at a restaurant miles away. He appeared cooperative, even sympathetic, expressing shock at the news. Detectives noted the faint tremor in his hands, the way he avoided eye contact when asked about the breakup, but suspicion alone was not evidence. He was released. The case pressed on. Then there was the phone call. Margaret's landline records showed an incoming call at 7:03 p.m., lasting 4 minutes. The number traced to a payphone outside a subway station in Queens. No surveillance cameras in 1979, no digital trail, just a metal booth and the echo of coins dropping into a slot. Who had called her? What was said in those 4 minutes? Friends could not recall her mentioning plans that evening. She had told a colleague she was going straight home. The medical examiner estimated she died less than 2 hours after that call. Detectives speculated the caller might have arranged to meet her, might have convinced her to open the door without hesitation. The tabloids caught the scent quickly. Brooklyn woman slain in mystery attack. Killer still at large. The phrase cold case had not yet been attached, but the seeds were there, buried in the uncertainty, in the absence of a suspect, in the growing stack of unanswered questions. For weeks the investigation moved with urgency. Officers retraced her steps from the subway stop to her building. They interviewed coworkers, former classmates, even distant cousins. They dusted surfaces again and again, hoping for a missed print. They sent fibers to the lab, waiting for results that came back inconclusive. The hallway carpet yielded no clear footprints. The murder weapon was never found. Winter settled over the city, heavy and gray, and with it came new crimes demanding attention. Resources shifted. Detectives were reassigned. Margaret's file grew thick but stagnant, pages of interviews clipped together with fading staples. Leads dried up. Daniel Reeves moved out of state the following spring. The payphone in Queens was eventually removed, replaced by a newer model, then removed again years later as the city modernized. Witness memories blurred. The man in the dark coat became less certain, then almost imagined. The thud heard at 8:30 p.m. might have been pipes clanging, someone suggested later. Maybe it meant nothing at all. Margaret's mother kept calling the precinct, her voice steady but edged with disbelief, asking if there was news, if they had found the person responsible, if they were close. Detectives offered careful reassurances, promises that the case remained open, that they had not forgotten. But months turned into years. The 1980s arrived with their own storms of crime and corruption, and Margaret Hale's name slipped from headlines into archives. Her photograph, brown hair parted neatly, a cautious smile, was clipped from newspapers and filed away. The apartment at 3B was repainted, rented to new tenants who had no idea what had happened in the narrow hallway where they now placed a shoe rack and umbrella stand. By 1985, the case was officially labeled inactive, the paperwork boxed and stored in a municipal warehouse alongside hundreds of others. Cold case. 2 words that carried a chill sharper than any winter wind. It meant the trail had frozen. It meant time had become the enemy. Evidence degraded. Witnesses moved or died. Detectives retired. Margaret became a memory held mostly by her aging mother and a shrinking circle of friends who still lit a candle on the anniversary of her death. And yet, beneath the dust and neglect, something waited. A detail overlooked. A fragment dismissed. In the original evidence log, item 27 sat quietly among the catalog belongings, a small, sealed envelope found tucked inside a legal textbook on Margaret's desk. It had been noted, photographed, and set aside because it contained nothing obviously incriminating, just a short handwritten note, and signed, reading, "We need to talk. Tonight. It's important." No fingerprints of value were lifted from the paper at the time. The ink was common blue ballpoint. Detectives had assumed it was from a colleague, perhaps related to work, and with no name attached, it led nowhere. The envelope was stored, forgotten, another loose thread in a case full of them. Decades later, when the city was different and the technology unrecognizable to those 1979 detectives, when DNA databases could resurrect identities from microscopic traces and old evidence was being re-examined under the harsh light of modern forensics, someone would reopen that box and find item 27 again, the paper slightly yellowed but intact, and realize that what had once seemed ordinary might have been the first tremor before an earthquake. But in 1979, standing in that dim hallway with a television casting blue light across a lifeless body, no one could see the future. No one could know that this quiet apartment would become a cold case whispered about in training rooms and true crime forums, a mystery stretching across generations. Waiting for a forgotten piece of evidence to breathe life back into a night the city had tried so hard to leave behind. For nearly 3 decades, Margaret Hale existed only as a name typed in fading ink on a cardboard file tab, her case number scrawled in black marker, stacked among hundreds of others in a climate-controlled warehouse where the air smelled of dust and paper rot, where unsolved murders slept in silence, undisturbed by time, but never truly at rest. Detectives retired, captains changed, precinct walls were repainted, and the city that had once trembled under the weight of 1979 crime statistics transformed into something sleeker, shinier, almost unrecognizable, yet in that box marked Hale, Margaret, homicide. The night of Baltic Street remained frozen, preserved in grainy photographs and brittle reports. The phrase cold case had long since attached itself to her name, spoken in low tones during briefings, shorthand for a failure no one liked to revisit. It was the spring of 2008 when Detective Laura Mendel pulled the file for the first time, part of a newly funded initiative aimed at re-examining unsolved homicides from the 1970s using modern forensic techniques. A last attempt to drag ghosts into fluorescent-lit interrogation rooms and demand answers. Mendel had built her reputation on patience, on an almost obsessive attention to detail, and when she opened Margaret's file, she did not see an old crime. She saw movement, gaps, pressure points where something had been missed. The photographs struck her first. The narrow hallway, the body positioned too carefully, the wine glass on the table. It didn't look like chaos. It looked controlled, intentional, personal. She read every interview transcript from 1979, every scribbled note in the margins, every underlined name. Daniel Reeves resurfaced immediately, the ex-boyfriend with the airtight alibi and the faint tremor in his hands. Mendel requested his file, discovered he had died in 1996 of a heart attack in Ohio, remarried, 2 children, no criminal record. Dead suspects don't confess. Dead suspects complicate everything. She moved on. The anonymous payphone call at 7:03 p.m. leapt off the page next, a detail that had once felt promising but dissolved in the absence of surveillance or witnesses. In 2008, however, the Queen's Transit Authority still maintained archived maintenance logs, and Mendel wondered whether anyone had ever checked who routinely serviced that specific payphone, who had access to its internal compartments, who might have lingered longer than a random caller. But it was item 27 that held her attention longest. The handwritten note. "We need to talk. Tonight. It's important." No signature. No date. In 1979, it had been treated as background noise. In 2008, it felt like a flare shot into the sky. Mendel sent the envelope and note to the lab for advanced forensic processing, touch DNA analysis, a technology non-existent when Margaret died. Weeks passed. Then the call came from the lab, calm but charged. A partial male DNA profile had been extracted from the envelope flap, likely from saliva used to seal it. It was degraded, incomplete, but viable enough to run through CODIS, the National DNA Database. The first search returned nothing. No match. The profile was uploaded, flagged, left to sit in the system like bait in dark water. Mendel refused to be discouraged. She turned back to the crime scene photos, enlarging them digitally, enhancing contrast, studying shadows that 1979 technology had flattened. On the hallway wall, near the light switch, she noticed a faint smudge that had been logged simply as possible transfer mark. No one had tested it further. She tracked down the original evidence bag, requested it be reopened. Inside was a tiny scrap of fabric fiber adhered to adhesive tape, preserved almost by accident. The lab ran comparative analysis. Wool blend. Dark navy. Common, yes, but consistent with overcoats popular in the late 1970s. The man in the dark coat. The witness who could never describe his face. Mendel tracked down surviving neighbors, now elderly, some relocated to Florida, others still clinging to rent-stabilized units in Brooklyn. Memory is unreliable, she knew, but sometimes age loosens tongues. One woman, Mrs. Kaplan, 90 if she was a day, remembered something she hadn't mentioned before, not because it was secret, but because no one had asked the right question. She recalled seeing Margaret in the lobby weeks before the murder, arguing in hushed but intense tones with a man she didn't recognize. Not Daniel Reeves.
Taller. Thinner.
He had a sharp voice, Mrs. Kaplan said, tapping her temple. Like he was slicing the air. The argument had ended abruptly when Mrs. Kaplan's elevator arrived. She had thought nothing of it at the time. In 1979, raised voices were background noise. Mendel cross-referenced Margaret's professional life next. As a paralegal in a midtown firm, she had access to sensitive case files, divorce proceedings, financial disputes, minor criminal defense work. Nothing high-profile, nothing obviously dangerous, but one case stood out, a civil fraud suit involving a small investment company accused of siphoning funds from elderly clients. The case had settled quietly 2 weeks before Margaret's death. The company's financial officer at the time was a man named Victor Salerno. Salerno had been interviewed briefly in 1979, according to a single-page memo buried deep in the file. He had claimed minimal interaction with Margaret, describing her as just paperwork staff. No further follow-up was documented. Mendel searched for Salerno in current databases. He was alive. 72 years old. Living in Staten Island. No felony convictions, but a handful of sealed civil disputes over the years. Nothing that screamed killer. Nothing that cleared him either. Then, late one humid August afternoon, Cody's pinged. The partial DNA profile from item 27 had produced a familial match. A close biological relative of the unknown contributor had recently been arrested in New Jersey for burglary. His DNA entered into the system. The software flagged a high probability of a parent-child relationship. The name attached to the arrested burglar was Anthony Salerno. Mendel felt the air shift in the room. Anthony Salerno, son of Victor Salerno. A court order was obtained quietly. Detectives collected a discarded coffee cup from Victor Salerno during routine surveillance outside his Staten Island home. The lab worked quickly this time. The DNA from the cup matched the partial profile extracted from the envelope flap in Margaret Hale's apartment. Not a distant match. Not a statistical whisper. A direct hit. Victor Salerno had sealed the envelope that read, "We need to talk. Tonight. It's important." 30 years collapsed in an instant. Salerno was brought in for questioning under the pretense of reviewing historical financial records. He walked into the interview room slower than he might have in 1979, hair silver, shoulders slightly stooped, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. Mendel watched him through the observation glass, studying micro-expressions as his gaze flicked across the table, the recorder, the door. When she entered, she did not mention DNA immediately. She spoke about the old fraud case, about Margaret's role, about routine procedures. Salerno's answers were smooth, almost bored. Yes, he remembered the firm. Yes, there had been tensions. No, he hadn't seen Margaret outside professional settings. Then Mendel placed a photocopy of the handwritten note on the table. His composure fractured, just barely but enough. A pause too long. A swallow. "I don't recognize that," he said, voice steady but thinner than before. She leaned in, voice low, controlled. "We found her DNA on the envelope." Silence. The kind that presses against the ears. Salerno stared at the paper as if it might rearrange itself into something harmless. His jaw tightened. For a moment it seemed he might demand a lawyer, might shut down entirely. Instead, he exhaled slowly, a sound almost like relief bleeding through resignation. "That was a long time ago," he murmured. Outside the room, the hallway buzzed with contained electricity. A 1979 cold case reopened. Forgotten evidence. A DNA match bridging decades. Detectives who had once worked the original scene were called at home, voices cracking with disbelief as they heard the news. Margaret's mother had passed away years earlier, never knowing this moment would come. The city that had moved on without her name was about to hear it again. Inside the interrogation room, Victor Salerno lifted his eyes from the note and met Mendel's gaze, and in that look was something heavy, something coiled, as if the past had finally caught up and was demanding to be spoken aloud. He parted his lips, the beginning of a confession forming in the stale air, and the story of Baltic Street, buried under layers of time and neglect, began to claw its way back into the light. Victor Salerno did not begin with an apology, did not lower his head in shame or ask for water or a lawyer. He simply stared at the note on the metal table as though it were an artifact from someone else's life, someone reckless and distant. And when he finally spoke, his voice carried the dry rasp of a man who had rehearsed this moment in his mind for years, but never believed it would arrive. He said Margaret Hale had been a problem, not in the violent sense detectives first imagine, but in the dangerous, meticulous way that threatens to unravel everything thread by thread. She had noticed discrepancies in financial transfers during the fraud case, small amounts moved between accounts before the settlement, sums that did not align with the official ledger. She had asked questions. She had requested clarification from Salerno directly. At first he dismissed her, told her she was misreading internal adjustments, but she persisted, and persistence in 1979 corporate Manhattan could be lethal if it threatened the wrong man. He described the note as an attempt to clear things up, a request to speak privately, away from the firm's partners, away from official records. He admitted he had called her from the Queen's payphone to ensure the conversation remained untraceable, a precaution that in his mind felt clever, controlled, foolproof. He said she sounded cautious on the phone but agreed to meet after work at her apartment, neutral territory. As he spoke, Detective Mendel watched for cracks, for inconsistencies, but the details flowed too smoothly, like a narrative polished over decades. He claimed he arrived shortly after 8, that she let him in without hesitation, that the wine on the table had been hers, not shared, because he declined a drink. He insisted the discussion began civilly, professional, until she revealed she had copied documents, copies he had not known existed, documents showing transfers implicating him in siphoning settlement funds before the case closed. Mendel interrupted softly, asking where those copies were now, and Salerno hesitated, a flicker in his eyes betraying uncertainty. He said she kept them somewhere in the apartment, perhaps in a desk drawer, perhaps hidden in a book. He could not remember. The vagueness rang louder than any denial. In the original 1979 search, no such copies had been logged. Either they had never been found, or they had never existed. Salerno continued, claiming the argument escalated, that Margaret threatened to expose him, to bring the evidence to the firm's senior partners or even the district attorney. He described feeling cornered, panicked, his career and reputation collapsing in a single conversation. Then he stopped speaking, jaw tightening as if the next words were physically difficult to push past his teeth. "What happened in the hallway?" Mendel asked, her tone steady. He swallowed. She turned away. She said she was done talking. She was going to call someone. There it was, the pivot point, the second when intent crystallizes. Salerno said he grabbed her arm, that she struggled, that she told him to get out. He insisted he did not plan to kill her, that the knife had been hers, taken from the kitchen in a blur of fear. He described a quick motion, a single cut, shock more than rage. The wound, he said, was not meant to be fatal. It was meant to stop her. Silence her. The word hung in the room, ugly and revealing. Silence. He claimed he dropped the knife, that he stood frozen as blood pooled along the baseboards, that he realized within seconds what he had done. He wiped the handle with a dish towel, he said, then took the knife with him when he left. He remembered adjusting her coat, not out of cruelty, but some warped instinct to restore order to the scene, to make it look less violent than it was. Controlled. Intentional. That precision detectives had noted in 1979 now had a voice. Mendel listened, but something did not align. There were no signs of a struggle, she said quietly. No overturned furniture. No defensive wounds beyond minor bruising. Salerno nodded slowly. She wasn't strong enough to fight me. The statement landed cold and heavy. Yet even as he confessed to being present, to wielding the knife, there were gaps, crucial ones. He could not explain the smudged fingerprint on the interior doorknob that did not match him. He could not account for the faint wool fibers inconsistent with a coat he claimed to have worn that night, a light gray trench rather than dark navy. When Mendel pressed him about the timeline, about the precise minute he left the apartment, his certainty wavered. He said perhaps 8:20, maybe 8:25. The medical examiner's window stretched to 9:15. Nearly an hour unaccounted for. Outside the interrogation room, technicians re-examined archived evidence with renewed urgency. The hallway tape containing that tiny fiber was compared against clothing retrieved from Salerno's home under warrant. None matched. His old garments from 1979 were long gone, donated or discarded decades earlier, but the discrepancy lingered like a shadow refusing to recede. If Salerno had killed Margaret in a panic and fled, why was the scene so composed? Why was there only one glass of wine poured? Why had neighbors heard a single thud but no drawn-out struggle? And why had Margaret's phone receiver been found neatly placed in its cradle rather than dangling, as one might expect if she had truly intended to call someone mid-argument? Mendel returned to the interview room with a new line of questioning, her instincts prickling. You said she threatened to call someone.
Who?
Salerno hesitated again. The police. Or her boss. I don't know. But the phone records show no outgoing call after 7:03 p.m., Mendel replied. And the receiver was on the hook. A flicker of irritation crossed his face. Maybe she changed her mind. Or maybe Mendel thought someone else had been there. She shifted tactics. Did anyone know you were going to see her that night?
No.
No colleague? No friend?
No.
His answers were sharp now, defensive. When confronted with the wool fiber evidence and the unidentified fingerprint, Salerno's composure thinned. He insisted the fingerprint could have belonged to a police officer in 1979, contamination common in those days. He dismissed the fiber as coincidence, secondary transfer from the building hallway. His confession, once flowing, became selective, cautious. He admitted enough to place himself at the scene, to explain the DNA on the envelope, but his narrative stopped short of the kind of granular detail that only a true perpetrator can provide: the exact angle of the wound, the position of her body when she fell, the specific words she uttered in her final seconds. When asked what Margaret's last words were, he stared at the table and said, "I don't remember." Memory is strange that way. It forgets what it wants to. Hours stretched. The recorder captured every pause, every breath. By evening, Salerno's lawyer had arrived, halting the interrogation. The partial confession, if it could even be called that, hung in legal limbo, neither fully retracted nor entirely solid. Prosecutors reviewed transcripts late into the night, debating whether the admission, combined with the DNA and circumstantial evidence, was enough to charge a 72-year-old man with a murder committed nearly 30 years earlier. The headline potential was explosive. New York 1979 cold case reopened. Forgotten evidence triggers shocking confession. The media would feast. The community would feel the tremor. But Mendel could not shake the unease settling in her chest. Confessions can be strategic. They can be shaped to fit the evidence already revealed, crafted to minimize exposure to additional charges, to control the narrative before someone else does. Salerno had placed himself in the apartment. He had admitted to violence. Yet pieces of the puzzle still refused to click. The unidentified fingerprint remained unmatched in the system. The dark navy fiber had no owner. And there was one more detail buried in the original autopsy report that gnawed at her: the presence of faint bruising on Margaret's opposite wrist, suggesting restraint from behind, not from a frontal confrontation as Salerno described. As night fell over Manhattan, casting long reflections across precinct windows, Margaret Hale's name echoed once more through hallways that had long forgotten her. Detectives prepared arrest paperwork, reporters began to circle, and somewhere in Staten Island Victor Salerno sat in a holding cell, staring at concrete walls, decades of silence collapsing inward. Yet the air around the case felt unsettled, as if the truth had surfaced only partially, like a body rising from deep water but still tethered to something below, something unseen, something waiting to drag the narrative in a direction no one in 1979 or 2008 had anticipated. By sunrise, the arrest was official. Victor Salerno, 72, former financial officer, now charged with the 1979 murder of Margaret Hale. Cameras clustered outside the precinct, flashes exploding against the dull gray of early morning, reporters shouting questions he did not answer as detectives guided him into a waiting vehicle. The headline wrote itself before the ink could dry. Cold case breakthrough. DNA revives decades-old homicide. Shocking confession after 30 years. The city pulsed with it, hungry for resolution, eager to believe that time had finally surrendered its secrets. But inside the case file, resolution still felt fragile. Detective Mendel stood over a conference table layered with photographs and lab reports, the old and new interwoven like a timeline stitched together with doubt. Salerno's confession had weight, yes. He placed himself at the scene. His DNA sealed the envelope. He admitted to grabbing a knife. Yet the autopsy photographs refused to align with his version of panic and impulse. The cut across Margaret's throat was too clean, too measured. Not a wild slash. Not the jagged mark of a frantic man. The medical examiner's original notes described the wound as controlled, lateral, consistent with deliberate force. That language had been underlined in red pen in 1979. No one had followed where it pointed. Then there was the matter of the second glass. In the living room photograph, the wine bottle stood open. One glass half full on the coffee table. A second glass, clean and dry, in the dish rack. Salerno had insisted he declined to drink. That Margaret poured only for herself. But lab reanalysis of the glass from storage revealed faint residue along the rim, microscopic traces missed by 1979 standards. Not lipstick. Skin cells. Partial. Degraded. Enough to test. The lab worked through the weekend. When the results returned, the room shifted. The DNA on the rim of the wine glass did not belong to Victor Salerno. It belonged to an unknown male. The same unknown male whose partial fingerprints still sat unmatched in the database. The same unknown male who might have worn a dark navy wool coat. Salerno had not drunk from the glass. Someone else had. Mendel replayed the interrogation recording, studying every inflection. Had Salerno ever mentioned sharing a drink?
No.
He had been precise, he declined. Margaret drank alone. A minor detail, perhaps. Or a fracture line splitting his narrative down the center. If another man had been in that apartment, if another set of hands had touched the glass, the doorknob, possibly Margaret herself, then Salerno's confession was incomplete at best, deceptive at worst. Prosecutors hesitated, charging him solely on a partial confession, and envelope DNA suddenly felt precarious. Defense attorneys would seize on the unidentified profile, on contamination arguments, on memory degradation over decades. The case, once surging toward closure, slowed into careful reassessment. Mendel returned to the timeline. 7:03 p.m., call from Queen's payphone. Approximately 8 p.m., Salerno claims he arrives. Between 7:45 and 9:15 p.m., estimated time of death. Neighbor, here's a thud around 8:30 p.m. If Salerno left at 8:20, as he suggested, who remained until 8:30? Or was the thud misremembered? Memory shifts with suggestion, and now that the media frenzy had erupted, surviving witnesses were revising their own recollections, calling tip lines, inserting themselves into history. Then a new detail surfaced. A retired patrol officer, one of the first responders in 1979, saw the news coverage and contacted the precinct. His voice was older now, slower, but steady. He said there had been something else in the hallway that night, something minor that never made it into the formal report because it seemed irrelevant at the time, a faint smell of cologne, strong and unfamiliar, lingering in the air. Not the metallic scent of blood. Not Margaret's perfume, which her mother later described as floral and subtle. This was sharper, musky. He remembered it because it struck him as out of place in that small apartment.
Cologne.
Mendel requested a review of property seized from Salerno during the search of his home. No matching fragrance found among his belongings, though decades had passed. Fragrance is ephemeral. It evaporates, reformulates, disappears. But the detail added weight to the possibility of another presence. She dug deeper into Margaret's life beyond work, beyond the fraud case. Friends had described her as private, yes, but not isolated. She attended a weekly book club. She occasionally met acquaintances for coffee after church. One name recurred in the margins of old interviews. Thomas Whitaker, a fellow church member, described in 1979 as helpful and protective of Margaret after her breakup with Daniel Reeves. Whitaker had not been considered a suspect. He had provided a brief statement, claimed he was home alone the night of the murder, no one to confirm. The file noted nothing unusual. He had moved out of state in the early 1980s. Mendel searched for him. Thomas Whitaker, age 75, residing in upstate New York. No criminal convictions. No DNA in Cody's. She stared at the unknown male profile from the wine glass and felt the slow tightening of possibility. If Whitaker had been in the apartment that night, if he had come by after Salerno, or before, what then? Had Margaret arranged to meet two men? Or had one arrived unexpectedly? The note said, "We need to talk. Tonight. It's important."
Singular. Direct.
But perhaps there had been more conversations than anyone realized. Salerno's attorney filed motions challenging the admissibility of the confession, arguing coercion, memory confusion, age-related vulnerability. The case teetered. Detectives needed clarity. They needed to confront Salerno again, this time with the glass, with the unidentified DNA, with the possibility that his version was not the whole truth. In the second interrogation, the air was different. Less surprise. More calculation. Mendel placed a photograph of the wine glass on the table. "We tested it again," she said calmly. There was another man in that apartment. Salerno's expression did not shatter. It hardened. "I told you what happened," he replied. "You told us part of it." Silence stretched thin. "Who else was there, Victor?" "No one. The DNA says otherwise." He leaned back, jaw clenched, eyes drifting to the corner of the room as if replaying a film only he could see. "You're trying to make this bigger than it was." "Margaret had bruises on both wrists," Mendel said softly. "One consistent with your story, the other from behind." A flicker. A crack. "You weren't alone," she pressed. He exhaled sharply. "I didn't kill her." The words dropped like a stone. "Not I didn't mean to. Not it was an accident. I didn't kill her." The room seemed to contract. "You confessed," Mendel reminded him. "I said I was there. I said we argued." His voice was rising now, frustration edging into something raw. "But when I left, she was alive." The statement detonated everything. If true, it meant Margaret Hale survived the confrontation with Salerno. It meant someone else entered that apartment after he walked out. Someone who drank from her glass. Someone whose fingerprint marked the doorknob. Someone who might have finished what Salerno started, or committed a different act entirely. Outside, the media continued to run with the narrative of a solved cold case, unaware that inside the interrogation room the ground was shifting violently beneath it. Prosecutors paused, reassessing strategy. A wrongful charge based on a partial truth would not survive trial. Mendel felt the case expanding, not narrowing. 30 years of silence had not concealed a single secret, but layered multiple ones atop each other. Salerno might have been corrupt, might have threatened Margaret, might have even injured her, but the fatal cut, the precise wound described in the autopsy, could belong to someone else entirely. As the sun dipped behind the skyline and precinct lights flickered on, Margaret's photograph sat propped against a stack of files, her cautious smile unchanged by decades of speculation. The city believed it was witnessing closure. In reality, the mystery had just deepened, the confession no longer an ending but a doorway, opening into a darker corridor where two men's shadows overlapped in a narrow hallway on Baltic Street, and the truth, long buried, began to fracture into something far more unsettling than anyone had prepared to confront. The moment Victor Salerno said, "When I left, she was alive," the entire architecture of the case shifted, not gradually but violently, like a building whose foundation had just cracked under pressure no one realized was there. For weeks the narrative had been clean, almost cinematic. Corrupt executive confronts paralegal, panic turns deadly, DNA resurrects the truth. It fit. It satisfied. It allowed the city to believe justice, though delayed, was inevitable. But now that narrative splintered, and in the splinters lay something far more dangerous, the possibility that Margaret Hale had faced not one man that night, but two. Detective Mendel ordered a full reconstruction of the timeline, minute by minute, refusing to treat Salerno's statement as manipulation without first testing its structure. If he left the apartment and Margaret was still alive, then someone else had entered after 8:20 p.m., before the estimated time of death closed at 9:15. The neighbor's recollection of a thud at approximately 8:30 suddenly regained relevance, no longer a vague background noise, but a potential marker. The question sharpened. Who had access, motive, and opportunity within that narrow window? Thomas Whitaker's name resurfaced with new weight. In 1979, Whitaker had been 38, unmarried, a regular at the same Brooklyn church as Margaret. Friends described him as attentive, sometimes intensely so. He often volunteered to walk her home after evening events. He had once told another parishioner that Margaret deserved someone who would protect her. The statement, benign at the time, now carried an edge. His alibi for the night of the murder had been thin, home alone reading. No witnesses.
No documentación.
In a city drowning in violent crime, such a soft lead had dissolved quickly. Mendel requested a voluntary DNA sample. Whitaker declined. The refusal was legal, expected, but it rang loud in the context of everything else. Detectives shifted tactics, initiating discreet surveillance while pursuing alternative avenues to obtain discarded DNA. Coffee cups, cigarette butts, anything left behind in public space. Meanwhile, the lab reanalyzed the unidentified fingerprint from the 1979 doorknob using enhanced digital comparison software unavailable decades earlier. The print remained unmatched in state and federal systems. If Whitaker had no prior arrests, his fingerprint would not be in the database. Pressure mounted. Salerno's defense team filed aggressive motions to dismiss, arguing his statement had been mischaracterized, that he admitted only to an argument, not murder. The prosecution hesitated to move forward without clarity. Charging the wrong man in a reopened cold case would not just be embarrassing, it would devastate credibility. Margaret's name deserved precision, not desperation. Then, another fragment surfaced from the original evidence inventory. Item 34, a small bruise pattern photographed on Margaret's left forearm, previously attributed to the struggle Salerno described. Under modern forensic review, the pattern appeared more consistent with a grip from behind, fingers pressing inward, thumb angled differently than Salerno's right-handed reach would allow. The lab conducted a comparative biomechanical analysis using Salerno's current hand structure measurements extrapolated backward to 1979. The alignment did not match cleanly. It wasn't definitive, but it wasn't comfortable either. Mendel sat alone in the evidence room late one evening, the hum of fluorescent lights vibrating faintly above her, studying Margaret's autopsy photographs again. There was something else. A detail so small it had gone unnoticed for decades. Beneath Margaret's fingernails, trace biological material had been collected, but never successfully typed with 1979 technology. The samples had been preserved, frozen, waiting for science to catch up. Now it had. The lab extracted partial DNA from the nail scrapings. Not Salerno's. A second male profile. The same unknown profile found on the wine glass. The same unknown profile that had touched the doorknob. The air in the precinct turned electric. If Salerno had been first, Whitaker, or whoever the unknown male was, had been second. Or perhaps the order was reversed. But the evidence was clear on one point. Margaret had fought someone else. Hard enough to leave biological traces beneath her nails. Mendel replayed Salerno's second interrogation again. When I left, she was alive. Had that been truth slipping through cracks of guilt? Or calculated deflection? If he had injured her but not killed her, if he believed someone else finished the act, then his silence for 3 decades was not just cowardice, it was self-preservation layered over deeper fear. Surveillance on Whitaker finally yielded opportunity. A plainclothes officer retrieved a discarded water bottle from a public park bench after Whitaker walked away. The lab moved swiftly. Hours felt like days. The DNA matched. Not partial. Not ambiguous. Thomas Whitaker was the unknown male in Margaret Hale's apartment on the night she died. Mendel felt the weight of the discovery settle into her bones. Whitaker had never been re-interviewed after 1979. He had moved quietly upstate, worked as a school administrator for years, retired without incident. To the world, he was stable, unremarkable. But in the forensic silence of a lab report, his presence in that hallway screamed. A warrant was issued. Whitaker answered the door himself when detectives arrived, his expression shifting from confusion to something tighter, more guarded, as badges flashed and his name was spoken in connection with a murder from 1979. He did not ask which one. He knew. In the interrogation room, decades collapsed again. Unlike Salerno, Whitaker did not begin by speaking. He listened as Mendel laid out the evidence, the wine glass, the fingerprint, the DNA under Margaret's fingernails. Each item placed methodically on the table between them like pieces of a weapon dismantled and displayed. You were there, Mendel said quietly. Whitaker's hands trembled slightly. I went to check on her. Why? She sounded upset earlier that week. How did you know to go that night? A pause. She called me. The statement struck like a match. Phone records showed no outgoing call after 7:03 p.m., but that did not account for calls earlier in the week. If Margaret had confided in Whitaker about Salerno's threats, if she had expressed fear, then Whitaker's arrival might not have been coincidence. It might have been intervention. Or obsession. What time did you arrive? Mendel asked. Around 8:30. After Salerno claimed to have left. Whitaker's voice wavered as he described knocking on the door, finding it slightly ajar. He said he entered and saw Margaret on the floor, bleeding but breathing. He claimed he panicked. Claimed he tried to lift her, that she struggled weakly, that she clawed at him. The DNA under her nails. The grip bruises from behind. He admitted to holding her, to trying to help, but insisted he never used a knife. So, how did her throat get cut? Mendel pressed. Whitaker's silence thickened the room. I didn't do that, he whispered. 2 men. 2 versions. 1 dead woman. If Salerno injured her and fled, leaving her wounded but alive, and Whitaker arrived after, what happened in those final minutes? Did Whitaker, seeing her blood, believing she was dying, make a choice? Did panic morph into something darker? Or was Salerno minimizing his own role, pushing the fatal act onto a convenient second presence? The truth lay somewhere between them, buried in a hallway on Baltic Street where time had layered dust over bloodstains long since scrubbed away. Margaret Hale had not just uncovered financial corruption, she had stepped into a collision of ego, fear, and obsession. One man with motive to silence her professionally, another with a fixation masked as protection. Outside the interrogation rooms, the city's appetite for closure turned restless. The cold case that had promised a single shocking confession now unraveled into something more disturbing, a convergence of secrets, 2 men bound by a night neither could fully escape, and a woman whose final moments remained fractured across competing stories. And as the evidence mounted, As science illuminated what memory tried to distort, one reality became impossible to ignore. Margaret Hale had not simply been the victim of opportunity. She had been at the center of a storm building quietly around her, unseen until it tore through her apartment door and left two shadows overlapping in the dim hallway light, each claiming innocence, each marked by her last desperate fight. The grand jury room was silent except for the low hum of fluorescent lights and the steady turning of pages, evidence laid out in chronological precision, 1979 photographs, autopsy slides, DNA charts. Transcripts from 2 interrogation rooms separated by 30 years but fused by the same hallway on Baltic Street. The prosecutors did not frame it as a mystery anymore. They framed it as convergence. 2 men, 2 decisions, 1 irreversible outcome. Victor Salerno was indicted for second-degree murder under a theory of intent. He wielded the knife, he initiated the violence, he walked away knowing she was critically injured. Thomas Whitaker was indicted under depraved indifference. He found her alive, applied force inconsistent with rescue, failed to summon aid, and left her to die. Separate charges. Same death. The media storm intensified.
Commentators dissected motive.
Legal analysts debated whether Whitaker's actions constituted panic or participation. The phrase dual responsibility began appearing in headlines. Margaret Hale's face, pulled from a 1978 office photograph, re-entered the public consciousness, no longer a faded archive, but a symbol of a case that refused to stay simple. In holding, Salerno and Whitaker never saw each other, but their attorneys did. Strategy meetings unfolded in parallel, each defense quietly aware that the other man's narrative could tip the balance. Salerno's team leaned into the pathology timeline, arguing the wound was survivable, that his client lacked intent to kill, that Whitaker's later actions were the true cause of death. Whitaker's attorneys countered that their client arrived to chaos already unleashed, that Salerno's initial assault set in motion an inevitable fatality, that any compression was desperate first aid misinterpreted decades later by modern analysis. Detective Mendel watched it unfold with a steady, controlled detachment. She had chased evidence, not villains. But now the courtroom would decide how those fragments aligned under law. Pretrial hearings exposed new layers. A forensic blood spatter expert testified that the pattern of arterial spray suggested Margaret was upright at the moment of the cut, likely facing her attacker. That aligned with Salerno's version. But subsequent pooling and drag marks indicated she moved or was moved after the initial injury. The defense for Whitaker seized on that ambiguity. Movement could indicate attempted assistance. The prosecution countered with the compression marks around the wound, consistent with sustained pressure applied not to stop bleeding but to restrict airflow. The courtroom became a battleground of interpretation. Margaret's fingernail DNA was presented with clinical precision. The lab analyst explained how epithelial cells matched Whitaker with statistical certainty. Salerno's counsel emphasized that such transfer could occur during attempted rescue. The prosecution displayed high-resolution images of crescent-shaped abrasions on Whitaker's forearm photographed during his arrest, faint scars he had carried unnoticed for decades. The jury leaned forward. Salerno took the stand. He looked smaller than in interrogation footage, voice controlled but edged with exhaustion. He admitted to the argument, admitted to grabbing the knife, but insisted he never intended to kill. "I wanted her to stop," he said. "That's all." When asked why he did not call an ambulance after realizing the severity of the wound, he hesitated too long. "I was afraid," he finally answered. "Afraid of exposure. Afraid of prison. Afraid of losing everything." The admission landed heavily. Whitaker's testimony was different, less sharp, more fractured. He described entering the apartment and seeing so much blood. He said he panicked, that he pressed his hands to her neck to stem the flow. When confronted with the compression pattern analysis, he shook his head. "I was trying to save her." When asked why he didn't dial 911, his voice broke. "I thought she was already gone." But medical experts testified that based on blood volume and lividity patterns, Margaret could have survived several additional minutes with immediate medical intervention. Minutes. In trauma care, minutes are everything. The prosecution built its case not around hatred, not around premeditated execution, but around cowardice layered in sequence. Salerno inflicted the wound and fled. Whitaker arrived and chose self-preservation over urgency. Two separate failures that overlapped fatally. Outside the courthouse, the public divided. Some saw Salerno as the clear killer, the man with the knife. Others viewed Whitaker's silence as equally monstrous, the man who could have called for help and didn't. Talk radio lit up with arguments about moral hierarchy. Which is worse, the strike or the abandonment? Through it all, Margaret remained voiceless except through evidence. Her final struggle reconstructed through bruises and blood trajectories. Her last attempts to breathe analyzed through pathology charts. The humanity of her fear translated into diagrams. Closing arguments drew the threads tight. The prosecutor stood before the jury and said, "This is not a story about a single moment. It is a story about what happens when two men, faced with consequence, choose themselves." He described the hallway light, the television flicker, the coat half-buttoned. He spoke of the phone untouched, of the silence where a 911 call should have been. The defense urged caution. Memory degrades. Evidence ages. Doubt lingers in old cases. They warned against convicting on reconstruction rather than certainty. The jury deliberated for 4 days. In that time, the city held its breath. When the verdict came, it was layered, complex, much like the case itself. Victor Salerno was found guilty of second-degree murder. The jury concluded that wielding the knife and abandoning the victim constituted intent sufficient under law. Thomas Whitaker was found guilty of manslaughter, the jury determining his actions accelerated death and that his failure to summon aid demonstrated reckless disregard for life. 2 convictions. 1 death. Sentencing day carried none of the spectacle of arrest.
No shouting reporters.
Just the quiet gravity of consequence delayed by 30 years. Salerno received a lengthy sentence that, given his age, amounted to life. Whitaker received a lesser but substantial term. Both men stood as the judge described Margaret Hale as a woman failed twice in one night. Detective Mendel sat in the back row, listening. There was no triumph in the room.
No applause.
Only a subdued recognition that justice, when it arrives decades late, carries a different weight. It does not restore. It does not rewind. It acknowledges. After the courtroom emptied, Margaret's surviving relatives, distant cousins now, spoke briefly to the press. They thanked investigators. They said her mother would have wanted this. They used the phrase cold case solved, but even that felt incomplete. Solved suggested simplicity. This had been anything but. That night, Baltic Street was quiet. Apartment 3B long since renovated, repainted, repurposed. New tenants unaware of the history beneath their floorboards. The hallway where 2 men once stood over a bleeding woman now held framed art and soft lighting. But the echo remains. Not just of violence, but of hesitation. Margaret Hale did not die instantly. She did not vanish without witnesses. She was surrounded, in her final minutes, by men who chose fear over courage. And decades later, under courtroom lights instead of television flicker, the city finally forced those choices into the open, where silence could no longer protect them. Conviction did not bring silence. If anything, it stirred the past louder than ever. Within weeks of sentencing, letters began arriving at the district attorney's office, anonymous notes, and signed postcards, a single typed page mailed without return address. Most were predictable. Claims of innocence, accusations of prosecutorial overreach, conspiracy theories about contaminated evidence. But one letter stood apart. It was postmarked from Albany. The paper was cheap, the ink slightly smudged as if fed through an aging typewriter. The message was short. You convicted the wrong order. No signature.
No elaboration.
Just 5 words that slipped under the skin. Detective Mendel read it twice, then a 3rd time. Wrong order. Not wrong men. Wrong order. The prosecution theory had been clear. Salerno first, Whitaker second. Knife, then compression. assault, then fatal acceleration. But what if sequence mattered more than anyone realized? What if the timeline reconstructed from pathology and confession had been inverted? The letter might have been nothing, an opportunist chasing attention in the wake of media frenzy. Yet cold cases teach one brutal lesson: ignore nothing. Mendel requested a final, comprehensive review of the physical evidence, this time focusing not on who, but on when. The lab revisited clotting patterns preserved in original photographs. Blood coagulation characteristics, though imperfect after decades, could still suggest intervals between injuries. A forensic hematologist was consulted, an expert in wound sequencing. She examined magnified images of the arterial spray and subsequent pooling. Her conclusion unsettled the room. The compression appears to have occurred before full arterial depletion, she explained, which suggests the applied pressure may have preceded the most catastrophic blood loss. In simpler terms, someone may have held Margaret's neck tightly before the deepest phase of bleeding. If Whitaker arrived after Salerno and attempted to help, the compression would have slowed blood flow, not intensified it. But if the compression came first, if someone restrained her throat, restricting airflow or blood circulation, and the knife wound followed, then the narrative shifted entirely. Sequence determines intent. Mendel returned to the archived crime scene negatives once more. In one image, previously dismissed as shadow distortion, she noticed faint bruising along the side of Margaret's jaw, consistent with a hand clamped across her mouth. That bruise pattern had not been fully analyzed during trial. It had seemed secondary, incidental. Now it glowed with implication. She pulled Whitaker's initial 1979 interview transcript. A single sentence stood out, buried in routine questioning. He had told detectives he sometimes stopped by Margaret's apartment unannounced to make sure she was all right. At the time, it sounded protective. In retrospect, it sounded intrusive. What if Whitaker arrived first? What if Salerno's phone call at 7:03 p.m. triggered fear, and Margaret reached out to Whitaker earlier that evening? Phone logs did not capture local calls made before that timestamp unless they exceeded billing thresholds. There was a narrow blind spot in the record. If Whitaker arrived before Salerno, tension could have already filled the apartment. An argument. A confrontation. Perhaps Whitaker confessed feelings she did not return. Perhaps she told him about Salerno's threats, and Whitaker's obsession twisted into something darker. If he restrained her, hand over mouth, grip at throat, and in that struggle Salerno knocked at the door, walking into chaos rather than initiating it. The possibility fractured the clean legal resolution. Mendel visited Salerno in prison. Age had settled heavily on him now. The sharp edges dulled. When she presented the alternate sequence theory, he stared at her for a long time before speaking. "He was there when I arrived," Salerno said quietly. The statement hit like a dropped glass. "You testified you were alone with her."
Elite.
Why? Because I didn't want to explain why he was there. Salerno described knocking and finding the door partially open. He claimed he heard raised voices inside before entering. He said he saw Whitaker gripping Margaret's shoulders, her face pale, frightened. According to this version, Salerno stepped in, demanding an explanation. Words escalated. Accusations flew. Whitaker allegedly accused Salerno of harassing her. Salerno admitted he shoved Whitaker. The room spiraled into chaos. "And the knife?" Mendel asked. Salerno's jaw tightened. She grabbed it first. That detail had never surfaced before. He claimed Margaret reached toward the kitchen counter in panic, possibly to defend herself against both men. He said he wrestled the knife away during the struggle, and in the movement, the confusion, the collision of bodies, the blade cut her throat unintentionally. Not a deliberate slash. A chaotic one. And Whitaker? Mendel pressed. He froze. Then he grabbed her. He wouldn't let go. Salerno insisted he fled because he believed both of them would be blamed. That Whitaker shouted at him to leave. That when he glanced back from the doorway, Whitaker was already holding her neck, pressing.
2 men.
2 decades of silence. 2 versions reshaped under consequence. Mendel then visited Whitaker. When confronted with Salerno's revised account, Whitaker's reaction was immediate: anger, sharp and unfiltered. "He's rewriting history to save himself," Whitaker snapped. But when pressed about arriving first, about possible confrontation before Salerno entered, his denial faltered. "She was scared," he admitted. "She didn't know who to trust." "Did you restrain her before Salerno arrived?"
No.
"Did you put your hand over her mouth?" Silence. His breathing quickened, eyes darting not with confusion but calculation. The hematologist's sequencing analysis loomed over both accounts. If compression preceded the deepest arterial bleed, Whitaker's role intensified. If the knife wound occurred amid 3 bodies struggling rather than a controlled slice, Salerno's original confession collapsed. The case, legally closed, began to feel unsettled again, not in verdict, but in truth. Publicly, nothing changed. Appeals were filed as expected. Convictions stood pending review. The city moved forward. Privately, Mendel felt the ground shift once more beneath Baltic Street. Justice in court does not always equal historical clarity. Sometimes it captures responsibility without capturing sequence. Margaret's final minutes remained partially obscured, 2 men circling her in fear and ego, a knife flashing in confusion, hands gripping in panic. Whether Whitaker restrained her first or Salerno cut first, the outcome converged the same way: no call for help, no immediate rescue, only abandonment layered over violence. Late one evening, alone in the evidence archive, Mendel placed the anonymous letter back into its envelope. "You convicted the wrong order." Perhaps. But what remained undeniable was this: Margaret Hale stood in her apartment in 1979 surrounded not by strangers, but by men who claimed to care in different ways, one professionally entangled, the other emotionally obsessed, and in the collision of those claims, her life narrowed to a hallway. A blade, and hands that chose control over compassion. Order mattered, but silence had mattered more. And even now, with 2 convictions secured, the cold case carried a lingering chill, not of doubt about guilt, but of uncertainty about that final sequence of seconds when fear eclipsed humanity and left behind a story still shifting under forensic light. Appeals move slowly, but doubt moves faster. Within a year of conviction, both defense teams filed extensive appellate briefs, each arguing not innocence, but misinterpretation. Salerno's attorneys claimed the prosecution leaned too heavily on reconstructed intent, that the knife wound could not be proven deliberate beyond reasonable doubt given the alternative sequence theory now surfacing. Whitaker's counsel attacked the compression analysis, arguing that modern forensic reinterpretation of decades-old photographs lacked the certainty required for a manslaughter conviction. The phrase "wrong order" even appeared indirectly in a footnote: sequence uncertainty undermines causal certainty. The appellate court agreed to review specific forensic admissibility questions. And just like that, the 1979 cold case, once declared solved, slid back into instability. Detective Mendel, though no longer lead at trial stage, was called to consult during the appeal review. The hematologist who had suggested compression may have preceded catastrophic blood loss was cross-examined under harsher scrutiny. Defense experts countered with alternate clotting models, arguing that photographic discoloration after decades could distort wound interpretation. Blood behaves unpredictably. Tissue degrades. Certainty blurs. Then something unexpected happened. A retired evidence technician from 1979 came forward after watching televised coverage of the appeals hearing. He had remained silent during trial because he believed everything relevant had already been documented. But he remembered something small, procedural, something never formally logged. He remembered the knife. Or rather, he remembered the absence of it. In 1979, officers searched dumpsters within a 3-block radius the morning after Margaret's body was discovered. They found nothing. But later that week, sanitation workers reported a kitchen knife recovered from a storm drain 2 streets away. It had been logged briefly, then dismissed because no visible blood remained after exposure to water and debris. Without clear forensic linkage, it was never introduced into evidence. The technician remembered because he had tagged it. The knife had a distinctive feature: a chipped wooden handle. Mendel felt a cold surge of urgency. She ordered a search through archived property storage. Miraculously, the knife still existed, sealed, forgotten, mislabeled under miscellaneous recovered items. Modern testing began immediately. Despite decades of environmental exposure, trace biological material remained embedded in microscopic crevices of the handle. Degraded, fragmented, but testable. The lab extracted 2 partial DNA profiles. One matched Margaret. The second matched Thomas Whitaker. Not Salerno. The room went silent when results were confirmed. If Salerno had wielded the knife as he originally confessed, his DNA should have been present on the handle. Skin cells transfer easily during forceful grip. Instead, Whitaker's profile dominated the recovered trace. The appellate landscape shifted overnight. Salerno's defense moved aggressively, arguing wrongful conviction on the murder count. Whitaker's attorneys attempted damage control, suggesting secondary transfer, claiming Whitaker may have handled the knife while attempting aid. But the presence of his DNA on the handle, combined with compression sequencing uncertainty, destabilized everything. Mendel returned once more to the reconstructed timeline. If Whitaker arrived first, if he confronted Margaret emotionally, perhaps confessing feelings she did not reciprocate, if he restrained her, hand over mouth, grip tightening as panic escalated, if the knife entered the equation during that confrontation, and if Salerno then arrived mid-chaos, walking into an already volatile scene, the roles invert. Salerno's panic and departure remain cowardly, but Whitaker's proximity to the weapon becomes central. Whitaker was brought back for supplemental questioning under the weight of new evidence. He looked older now than at trial, shoulders slumped, eyes ringed with fatigue that felt less physical and more cumulative. "The knife has your DNA," Mendel said evenly. "I tried to take it away from her," he replied quickly. "That's not what blood pattern suggests." Silence. "We recovered it from a storm drain 2 streets away." His jaw tightened. "You disposed of it?"
No.
"Then how did it get there?" He said nothing. Mendel placed the chipped handle knife photograph on the table. "Victor Salerno's DNA isn't on this." Whitaker's breathing grew shallow. "You said she grabbed it first," Mendel continued softly. "Victor now says you were there before him." Whitaker's composure finally fractured. "He's lying." "About which part?" The room held its breath. Whitaker stared at the photograph as if it were a mirror reflecting something he had spent decades suppressing. "She didn't want him there," he whispered. "Or you." He looked up sharply. "She told me to leave." The confession did not explode. It leaked. He admitted arriving earlier than previously stated. Admitted confronting her about Salerno's threats. Admitted telling her she shouldn't meet Salerno alone. Voices rose. Emotions tangled. When she insisted he leave, he felt dismissed, replaced, irrelevant. "She said I was overreacting," he said, voice trembling. "That I wasn't her guardian." And then, she moved toward the kitchen. The knife was within reach. He claimed he grabbed it first, not to attack, but to keep things from getting worse. But control is a thin line away from escalation. Margaret tried to pull free. In the struggle, the blade cut her throat. An accident, he insisted. But accidental wounds do not explain sustained compression.
"She was bleeding," he said.
I panicked. "You held her neck." "I was trying to stop it." "Why didn't you call 911? His answer came slower this time. "Because I saw him at the door." Salerno. According to Whitaker's revised account, Salerno arrived moments after the cut. He walked into a scene already catastrophic. Accusations flew instantly. Salerno allegedly accused Whitaker of attacking her. Whitaker claimed he shouted for help. Salerno shouted back. And in the chaos of mutual fear, neither man acted decisively. "Did Victor ever touch the knife?" Mendel asked.
No.
"Did he cut her?"
No.
The inversion was complete. 2 men had stood in that hallway. One with blood on his hands. The other with fear in his eyes. Both leaving. Both silent. The appellate court scheduled emergency review hearings. Public reaction reignited with fury. Commentators questioned how a chipped wooden handle sat untested for decades, how a storm drain recovery went ignored, how a cold case, once declared triumphantly solved, now threatened to unravel again. Margaret Hale's death refused simplification. In the dim hallway of apartment 3B, 30 years earlier, it may not have been a corrupt executive striking in panic followed by a failed rescuer. It may have been obsession igniting first, professional fear arriving second, and in the collision of both, a woman caught between them. As the legal system prepared to reassess convictions under the weight of new forensic truth, one reality crystallized with brutal clarity. The night of 1979 was not a linear tragedy. It was a convergence of ego, jealousy, and fear unfolding within minutes of each other, each man later reshaping memory to survive it. The knife had been silent for decades. Now, pulled from a storm drain and placed under laboratory light, it spoke louder than either confession ever had. The appeals hearing did not carry the spectacle of the original trial. No crowded courthouse steps. No shouting reporters. Just a courtroom heavy with the knowledge that justice, once declared, might have to be reconsidered under harsher light. The chipped wooden-handled knife sat sealed in an evidence bag on the prosecution table, its surface worn by water and time, its significance sharper now than in 1979. The forensic analyst testified calmly. Whitaker's DNA was present in measurable quantity along the handle. Margaret's blood trace was embedded in microscopic grooves near the blade base. No detectable DNA belonging to Victor Salerno was identified on the handle despite advanced testing sensitive enough to isolate trace touch profiles. Salerno's murder conviction wavered. Whitaker's manslaughter conviction trembled in the opposite direction. Sequence was no longer a theoretical debate, it was structural. If Whitaker wielded the knife first, even unintentionally, the entire architecture of responsibility shifted. Salerno took the stand again under appellate questioning. This time his tone was stripped of defensiveness. Age and prison had hollowed something inside him. He admitted he lied during the initial reinvestigation out of fear that revealing Whitaker's presence would implicate him further. He described walking into the apartment and seeing blood already flowing. He insisted he never touched the knife. He admitted to shouting, to arguing, to backing away. "Why didn't you call 911?" the judge asked directly. Salerno's answer did not change. "Because I didn't want to be connected to it." Cowardice remained constant. Whitaker's testimony, however, grew more unstable under renewed scrutiny. Confronted with the DNA on the knife and his shifting timeline, he finally conceded what had hovered unspoken for months. "I picked it up," he said quietly. The courtroom stilled. "I didn't mean to cut her," he added quickly, voice rising with urgency. "We were arguing. She reached for it. I grabbed it. She pulled back. It happened fast." "But you held the knife," the prosecutor pressed. "Yes." "And you were the first to touch it?" A pause. "Yes." The hematologist's sequencing analysis was reintroduced, this time contextualized alongside the knife evidence. If Whitaker initiated the blade contact, accidental or not, and then attempted to compress the wound in panic, the compression before catastrophic bleed interpretation aligned. The arterial spray pattern could still reflect upright positioning during the cut. Salerno's arrival into that moment no longer required him to be the aggressor. The legal implications were stark. Salerno's conviction for second-degree murder could not stand if reasonable doubt existed about who inflicted the fatal wound. Whitaker's manslaughter conviction might escalate toward murder depending on demonstrated recklessness and intent. The appellate ruling arrived weeks later. Victor Salerno's murder conviction was vacated due to insufficient forensic linkage to the weapon. However, the court upheld a conviction for criminally negligent homicide based on his failure to render aid and his admitted presence during a life-threatening emergency. Thomas Whitaker's conviction was modified upward, second-degree murder under a theory of extreme emotional disturbance resulting in fatal injury. The inversion was complete. The public reaction was immediate and divided. Some viewed it as correction, others as chaos. Talk shows questioned how two trials could produce two different central narratives. But the legal system is not built for emotional symmetry. It is built for evidence weight. Detective Mendel sat in her office the evening the ruling became public, staring at Margaret Hale's photograph once more. In 1979, two men had stood in her apartment within minutes of each other. For decades, each had reshaped memory to reduce his role, to soften edges, to survive the guilt. The cold case had first seemed like a single hidden truth buried under time. Instead, it revealed a layered collision where truth shifted depending on who spoke first. Whitaker had arrived early, driven by obsession masked as protection. An argument spiraled. Control slipped. The knife flashed. Blood followed. Salerno arrived into chaos and chose self-preservation over courage. Neither man called for help. Neither accepted responsibility until science forced their hands. The chipped handle, submerged in a storm drain for 30 years, became the silent witness that neither could outrun. Sentencing under the modified convictions felt less theatrical than the original trial. Whitaker, now visibly diminished, listened as the judge described his actions as a fatal convergence of possessiveness and panic. Salerno received a reduced sentence reflecting negligence rather than direct homicide. Both would spend the remainder of their lives defined by a hallway in 1979. Outside, Baltic Street remained ordinary. Traffic moved. Windows glowed. New tenants lived unaware. But the story of Apartment 3B had changed shape 3 times, first as an unsolved mystery, then as a shocking confession, then as a dual liability tragedy, and finally as a reordered truth forced into clarity by overlooked evidence. Margaret Hale's name resurfaced in headlines again, this time framed not around surprise confession but around forensic reversal. Commentators used phrases like cold case correction and justice recalibrated. Yet beneath legal terminology lay something simpler, a woman confronted by a man who claimed to care too much and another who cared too little. Late at night, long after the cameras moved on, Mendel visited the original building one final time. The hallway had been renovated, paint fresh, lighting modern. Nothing remained of 1979 except dimensions. She stood where Margaret had fallen and imagined the sequence, now understood. Whitaker's voice raised. Margaret stepping back. The knife. A cut not born of professional threat, but personal rejection. Salerno at the door. Fear layered over fear. Two men choosing silence over rescue. Cold cases are rarely about monsters hiding perfectly. More often, they're about fragile egos colliding in confined spaces, about seconds that spiral beyond intention, about decisions not to dial 3 numbers that could change everything. As Mendel stepped back onto Baltic Street, winter air sharp against her face, she understood that the case was finally aligned, not because it delivered dramatic simplicity, but because it acknowledged complexity without surrendering accountability. The storm drain had held the truth quietly for decades. It took time, technology, and relentless doubt to pull it back into the light. In the end, there was no applause. No cinematic finality. Just paperwork, prison transfers, and a file once stamped cold case, now stamped adjudicated, a bureaucratic word that felt too small for what it carried. Thomas Whitaker entered state custody under a murder conviction shaped not by rage, but by emotional fracture. Victor Salerno, his sentence reduced yet still heavy with consequence, carried a different label: criminal negligence, failure to act, abandonment in the face of mortal injury. Two men who had once walked freely out of apartment 3B on Baltic Street now walked through metal gates that would not reopen easily. But the true ending of 1979 did not live in sentencing transcripts. It lived in reconstruction. It lived in those final 7 to 9 minutes. Whitaker arrived first. That much the knife and DNA had clarified. He entered not as an attacker in his own mind, but as a self-appointed protector. Margaret had confided in him about Salerno's financial intimidation. She had expressed anxiety. But anxiety does not equal invitation. Concern does not equal ownership. In Whitaker's world, the line blurred. He confronted her about meeting Salerno. She pushed back. He pressed harder. Voices rose in that small apartment. The television played in the background, flickering blue against the walls. She moved toward the kitchen, not necessarily for a weapon, perhaps just to create distance. But he followed. He reached first. His hand closed around the knife handle with the chipped wood. The argument shifted from words to motion. She grabbed at him. He tried to restrain her. In the struggle, the blade cut across her throat, whether by force, by slip, by chaotic collision. The distinction mattered legally, but not biologically. The wound opened. Blood came fast. Shock froze him. He pressed his hands to her neck, not with surgical precision, not with knowledge, but with blind panic. Pressure in the wrong place. Compression that may have slowed bleeding briefly, then worsened it. She clawed at him. Her nails caught skin. His DNA lodged beneath them like a final accusation. Then came the knock. Salerno at the door. He stepped into a nightmare already in progress. He saw blood. He saw Whitaker. He saw exposure. His instinct was not rescue, it was survival. Accusations flew between the two men. Each blamed the other. Margaret tried to speak. Perhaps she said a name. Perhaps only air escaped her. Neither man called 911. Not when the wound was fresh. Not when pressure could have been replaced with proper aid. Not when seconds still mattered. Salerno left first. Whitaker followed minutes later. Margaret lay alone in the hallway between bedroom and bathroom, shoes still on, coat half-buttoned, television humming softly in the other room. The city moved outside her windows unaware. Neighbors heard a thud and dismissed it. Pipes, maybe. A dropped object. Nothing urgent enough to interrupt their night. By the time police forced the door, the silence had hardened. For decades, that silence protected both men. Salerno built a life elsewhere. Whitaker continued attending church, presenting as steady, dependable. The chipped-handled knife rested in darkness beneath a storm grate, rain washing over it season after season. Evidence waited patiently. Science caught up. Memory fractured under pressure. The cold case reopened not because someone remembered clearly, but because someone preserved carelessly. Item 27. A forgotten envelope. DNA invisible in 1979 became undeniable in 2008. A wine glass, once thought irrelevant, yielded skin cells. Fingernails preserved beneath frozen labeling carried microscopic testimony. And finally, a mislabeled knife recovered from a drain, dismissed once, decisive later, reordered truth entirely. The shocking confession that first electrified headlines belonged to the wrong man in the wrong sequence. Salerno confessed presence and panic. Whitaker confessed partial accident. Neither confessed fully until evidence cornered them. The final legal posture reflected that complexity. Whitaker bore the weight of the blade. Salerno bore the weight of abandonment. Margaret Hale bore the cost of both. Years after sentencing, Detective Laura Mendel retired quietly. On her final day, she requested access to the archive one last time. She opened the box marked Hale, Margaret, and removed the original crime scene photograph, the hallway, the coat, the stillness. She studied it not as evidence, but as a reminder. Cold cases are not frozen because truth is unknowable. They freeze because truth is inconvenient, incomplete, buried beneath fear and ego. Margaret's story traveled through 4 decades of silence, 2 convictions, 1 reversal, and a reordered timeline before settling into clarity. Not perfect clarity, but enough. On Baltic Street, apartment 3B has long since changed hands. Renovations erase stains. New paint covers old trauma. Children run up and down the stairwell. Delivery drivers knock without knowing history. Life folds over violence like fresh snow over pavement. But some nights, when the hallway is quiet and the building hums softly in the dark, there is still the echo of a choice not made. 3 numbers not dialed. A door left without help. The 1979 cold case that once shocked New York did not end with a single monster revealed. It ended with something more unsettling. Two ordinary men placed in an extraordinary moment, each failing in a different way, their combined fear sealing a fate that might have been prevented. Justice, when it finally arrived, did not erase that hallway. It illuminated it. And in that light, the final truth stood stark and unblinking. Margaret Hale did not die in mystery. She died in the space between obsession and cowardice. And it took 30 years, a storm drain, and a forgotten piece of evidence to make the city finally see it. They called it a solved case. Then they called it a correction. But in the scripted retelling that followed years later, when streaming platforms turned tragedy into episodic obsession, they called it what it had always been, a collision. Part 12 opens not in 1979, not in a courtroom, but in a dim soundstage built to resemble Baltic Street. The hallway reconstructed from photographs. The chipped paint recreated by production designers who studied archival grain. The television glow simulated. The coat placed precisely where it had once fallen. Actors step into positions once occupied by fear. Because stories like this refuse to die quietly. In the dramatized version, the camera lingers on Whitaker's hand hovering over the chipped wooden handle. It slows time. It amplifies breath. It isolates the second before contact. The narrator's voice, low, controlled, relentless, asks the question that haunted investigators for decades: when does concern become control? The fictionalized Whitaker is not played as a monster. That would be too simple. He is portrayed as meticulous, attentive, increasingly intrusive. He shows up unannounced. He frames jealousy as protection. He believes proximity equals entitlement. The script does not scream villainy. It whispers escalation. Margaret, in this retelling, is given more space than history once allowed her. Scenes of her alone. Scenes of her laughing. Scenes of her hesitating before answering the door. The audience watches her sense the tightening perimeter around her life long before the men realize what they are becoming. The dramatized Salerno is colder, sharper, but not theatrical evil. His menace is corporate indirect. Financial leverage. Subtle threats. Pride wounded by resistance. He does not imagine violence when he walks toward Baltic Street that night. He imagines dominance restored. The episode reconstructs the fatal sequence with surgical pacing. Whitaker arrives first. The argument spirals. The kitchen light flicks on. The knife block sits between them like an unspoken possibility. When his hand closes around the handle, the soundtrack cuts to silence. The struggle is not choreographed like a fight scene. It is clumsy, desperate, human. The blade flashes once. A red line appears. Neither character immediately understands the magnitude of what has happened. Blood changes everything. Compression follows, hands pressing instinctively, incorrectly. The narrator describes panic as physics, adrenaline narrowing vision, reason collapsing inward. Margaret's fingers claw. Skin under her nails captures what memory later tries to erase. Then the knock. Salerno steps into horror mid-frame. The audience sees his calculation in real time. Help or distance. Exposure or escape. His jaw tightens. His eyes flick to the door. The choice is subtle. The choice is fatal. The episode does not dramatize a villain's grin. It dramatizes hesitation. Both men hesitate, and that hesitation becomes the loudest sound in the room. In the final scene of the reenactment, Margaret lies alone as footsteps retreat. The camera does not rush. It does not cut away quickly. It stays. The television hums. A neighbor upstairs laughs at something unrelated. Life continues in adjacent rooms. The narrator closes the episode not with accusation, but with indictment of something broader. Cold cases are not always about what we cannot see. Sometimes they are about what we refuse to do. When the fictional series airs, audiences respond with familiar intensity. Social media dissects the hallway blocking. True crime forums debate whether the compression was instinct or concealment. Commentators argue over which man failed more catastrophically. Viewers replay the knife scene frame by frame, as if slow motion can undo inevitability. But beneath the spectacle, something deeper lingers. The saga reframes the 1979 cold case not as a mystery of identity, but as a study of seconds. Seconds when ego overrides empathy. Seconds when dialing 3 numbers feels riskier than walking away. Seconds when fear rewrites morality. In interviews promoting the series, the fictionalized version of Detective Mendel, portrayed by an actress with steady eyes and restrained intensity, says a line that becomes the show's quiet thesis. Truth didn't change. Technology just cornered it. The stormed rain becomes symbolic in the series. Rain falling year after year. Metal rusting. Evidence waiting. The chipped wooden handle underwater, patient, indifferent to human denial. Time passes above it. Elections, marriages, funerals, while truth sits below street level, untouched. When the final episode of the dramatized saga closes, it returns to Baltic Street in present day. The camera glides down the renovated hallway. Fresh paint. Modern fixtures. A child's bicycle leaning against the wall. No blood.
No hecho. No visible scar.
But the narrator's final words cut clean. Some cases go cold because the killer is brilliant. Others go cold because everyone involved is painfully ordinary. The screen fades to black. No triumphant music.
No catharsis.
Just the lingering awareness that the most devastating crimes are not always engineered by masterminds, but born from insecurity, pride, and the fatal instinct to protect oneself first. In this cinematic retelling, the 1979 cold case becomes more than a headline. It becomes a mirror.
Not asking who held the knife,
but asking who, in that hallway, chose silence. And how many tragedies begin exactly the same way? By the time the series reaches part 14, the crime itself is no longer the center of gravity. The center is consequence. The episode opens not with blood, not with the knife, but with a courtroom sketch artist's charcoal dragging slowly across textured paper. The camera stays tight on the drawing as Whitaker's face takes shape in graphite, older, heavier, carved by exposure. The narrator's voice returns, lower now, less explosive, more surgical. Cold cases do not end when the verdict is read. They echo. The dramatized appeal has long concluded. The reordered truth has been legally acknowledged. But Part 14 asks a quieter, more unsettling question. What does accountability look like when it arrives 30 years late? Inside the fictional correctional facility, Whitaker moves through routine like a man learning gravity from scratch. The show does not sensationalize prison life. It isolates him in small, human details, hesitation before sitting, flinching at loud metal doors, staring too long at nothing. His guilt is no longer argumentative. It is ambient. Across the state, Salerno lives under supervised release in this dramatized timeline, aging in a modest apartment, reputation permanently fused to a headline. He watches news coverage of a streaming series based on the Baltic Street cold case. He sees an actor portray him stepping back from Margaret instead of forward. He switches the television off. The episode intercuts between fiction within fiction, the series being consumed by the public, and the private weight carried by those who survived it. True crime becomes content. Content becomes currency. But Margaret Hale, in this final stretch of storytelling, is pulled back into focus. The production dedicates extended screen time to her journals, fictionalized, yes, but grounded in emotional truth. We hear voiceover passages of her expressing frustration at being underestimated in business meetings, anxiety about conflict, fatigue from mediating male egos. A line appears that hits with quiet force. I don't want to manage other people's anger anymore. The audience now understands the cruel symmetry. She was managing it the night she died. Part 14 reconstructs the hallway one final time, but differently. No dramatic scoring. No stylized lighting. Just raw, almost documentary realism. The argument is shorter this time. The struggle less choreographed. The cut more abrupt. The compression more desperate than violent. Salerno's entrance more confused than sinister. The narrator does not assign archetypes. He dissects failure. Obsession is loud, he says. Cowardice is quiet. That night, both were lethal. In the cultural aftermath portrayed in this episode, universities invite legal scholars to debate the case. Forensic science panels cite the chipped handle knife as an example of evolving evidentiary power. Ethics discussions question whether delayed justice is justice at all. The phrase wrong order becomes shorthand in legal classrooms for the fragility of narrative construction. Yet beyond academia and streaming analytics, the episode narrows again to Baltic Street. A young couple moves into their renovated apartment, unaware of history beyond a vague disclosure form. They argue playfully about furniture placement. They hang artwork. They create new sound where silence once hardened. Life does what it always does, it overlays. The camera lingers in the hallway after they close their door. For a brief second, the lighting matches 1979. The echo of raised voices flickers, barely audible. Then it's gone. In the final act of Part 14, Detective Mendel, now fully retired in the dramatized arc, attends a quiet memorial event organized not by media, not by the courts, but by a small community group advocating for cold case review reform. No cameras.
No spectacle.
Just candles and paper cups against winter air. She does not speak publicly. She stands at the edge of the crowd as Margaret's name is read aloud without qualifiers. No victim, no case, no headline. Just a name. The narrator closes in a tone stripped of shock value. Cold cases are reopened by evidence, but they are resolved by recognition. Recognition that technology does not create truth, it uncovers it. Recognition that justice delayed reshapes lives long before it arrives. Recognition that tragedy often begins not with hatred, but with entitlement. The final visual of Part 14 is not the knife. It is not the courtroom. It is not the prison gate. It is a close shot of the storm drain on a rain-slick street, water moving steadily through metal grates, indifferent and constant. The place where the truth waited without agenda. The place that held silence until someone decided to look again. The screen fades slowly.
No dramatic scene.
Just the lingering understanding that this fictional 1979 cold case was never about a mastermind hiding perfectly in shadow. It was about two men who believed their feelings justified intrusion, and one woman who paid for that belief with her life. The narrator's final words land without flourish. Sometimes the most shocking confession is not what was done. It's how long it took to admit it. Fade to black. Part 15 does not open with the past. It opens with a question. A university lecture hall. Dimmed lights. A projector screen frozen on a still image of the chipped wooden-handled knife. Students sit in silence as a criminology professor asks, almost clinically, at what exact second did this become murder? The series has moved beyond reenactment. Now it dissects its own anatomy. The Baltic Street cold case has become curriculum, cautionary tale, cultural artifact. The hallway is no longer just a crime scene, it is a case study in escalation. Cut to archival-style footage within the show's universe. Talk shows debating whether Whitaker's act was intent or impulse. Podcasts replaying the 911 question again and again. Why didn't either man call? Legal analysts arguing that Salerno's failure to act may have been morally heavier than Whitaker's panic. The narrator returns, steady and unsparing. Cold cases rarely hinge on mystery alone. They hinge on human delay. The episode revisits that delay with microscopic intensity. A digital timer appears on screen, counting the estimated minutes between the first cut and final abandonment. 7 minutes. Maybe 9. In that narrow stretch of time, Margaret's survival odds shifted with every decision not made.
Minute 1, shock.
Minute 2, compression without clarity. Minute 3, accusation at the door. Minute 4, ego overriding urgency. Minute 5, the possibility of dialing 3 numbers. Minute 6, retreat. Minute 7, silence. The timer stops. The show does not embellish. It subtracts. It strips the event down to choice architecture, what psychologists call the narrowing tunnel of panic, when the brain defaults to self-preservation. Whitaker feared prison.
Salerno feared implication.
Both feared exposure more than loss. And that calculus cost a life. In Part 15, the fictional dramatization dares to explore an alternate frame, not a fantasy where Margaret survives, but a reconstruction where one of them makes a different decision. The scene plays again. Whitaker presses his hands to her neck.
Salerno Berstzin.
But this time, instead of argument, Salerno grabs the phone. Whitaker steps back. Sirens approach. The bleeding slows. The scene freezes before outcome is revealed. The narrator cuts in sharply. This version never happened. The power of that moment is not in hope, it is in contrast. The audience feels the thinness of the line between tragedy and survival. A single call, a single override of pride. Back in the present timeline of the saga, Whitaker sits in a prison interview room speaking to a documentary crew. His face is not framed as monstrous. It is framed as exhausted. "I didn't think," he says. The interviewer presses gently. "About her?" A long pause.
No.
"About me." That is the closest the series comes to a true confession, not of action but of priority. Salerno, in his separate filmed interview, offers something colder. "I knew if I stayed, my life was over." The narrator overlays his words with a quiet verdict. Margaret's life was already ending. Part 15 refuses redemption arcs. There is no spiritual awakening montage. No tearful apologies delivered at graveside. Instead, the show turns its lens outward, examining the machinery that allowed the case to freeze for decades. Underfunded labs. Evidence misfiled. Human bias shaping early narratives. The chipped knife almost discarded permanently because it seemed unimportant. The storm drain becomes metaphor once more, not just for hidden truth, but for overlooked detail. The smallest object shifted the entire order of guilt. In the closing movement of the episode, the camera returns to Baltic Street at night. Rain falls again, echoing the motif from earlier parts. The building stands unchanged in silhouette. A delivery truck idles. A dog barks somewhere upstairs. The narrator speaks one final time in this chapter. The New York 1979 cold case was never unsolvable. It was unfinished. Unfinished because two men rewrote memory to survive scrutiny. Unfinished because early investigators lacked tools that would later redefine certainty. Unfinished because silence is contagious. The final scene of Part 15 mirrors the very beginning of the saga. The hallway appears empty. The television glow flickers faintly through a half-open door. But this time, instead of focusing on the body that once lay there, the camera tilts upward, toward the ceiling, toward the unseen apartments above, toward the lives layered over history. The implication is clear. Cold cases are not buried in the past. They exist beneath the present. The screen fades slowly as rain continues to fall against pavement. And the narrator leaves the audience with a final, surgical line. Justice did not arrive because someone remembered. It arrived because someone looked again. Fade to black. Silence. Part 16 opens in total darkness. No music.
No narration.
Just breathing. Then a click. An old cassette recorder whirs to life. The screen fades in on a fictional archive room. Boxes. Labels. Evidence bags sealed decades ago. A younger version of Detective Mendel, early in her reinvestigation years, sits alone at a metal table. She presses play on a tape labeled simply, Interview, T. Whitaker, 1979. The audience hears it raw. No reenactment. No actor's face. Just audio. His younger voice is confident, controlled, helpful. He refers to Margaret as fragile. Says he worried about her judgment. Says he felt responsible. The narrator finally enters, quieter than ever. Listen closely. Obsession often introduces itself as concern. The tape continues. 1979 Whitaker insists he arrived after Salerno. Insists he never touched the knife. Insists he tried to help. The tape clicks off. Cut to present-day Whitaker in prison. Older, smaller, reduced. The same question is asked on camera decades later. Did you touch the knife? A long pause. Yes. The contrast is surgical. 30 years between denial and admission.
Same man.
Different gravity. Part 16 doesn't reconstruct the crime again. It reconstructs memory. Experts appear, fictional forensic psychologists, behavioral analysts, breaking down what happens to the brain after catastrophic guilt. They speak not in dramatic tones, but in precise language. Memory protects the self. Memory edits. Memory rearranges sequence to preserve identity. The phrase returns like a ghost. Wrong order. But now it applies not only to forensic sequencing. It applies to internal storytelling. Whitaker told himself a version where he arrived later, where he reacted, not initiated. Salerno told himself a version where he walked into something irreparable and bore no direct blame. Each reordered events internally long before courts did it legally. The narrator sharpens the idea. Cold cases are not just frozen in evidence lockers. They are frozen in the minds of the people who survived them. The episode then does something unexpected. It centers silence. A full minute of screen time shows the empty hallway set. No dialogue. Just ambient hum. The audience, conditioned